Hey y'all, my name is Sarah and I love to talk about movies. And today we're going to talk about Us. So the film begins with a little girl sitting in her living room watching TV. In the next scene, they are at the Santa Cruz pier for their daughter Adelaide's birthday. So she's walking around with her mother and father, who are not in the best mood, and while her father is playing one of the games, wanders off and into another sort of ride. It's really kind of spooky in there, especially with the storm approaching. There's thunder and lightning in the far distance, and it's very dark inside. So she follows a path through a sort of fake forest. An owl pops out and hoots at her. There are trees painted on the walls. And further in, she sees something. She opens her mouth to scream, and the scene abruptly ends. The next scene is of a family driving Adelaide as an adult. Her husband is driving her and their two children to their grandmother's. The house holds a lot of memories for Adelaide, and after they arrive and they get settled in, they have something to eat, the kids unpack. She wanders through the house looking at things and thinking back to her childhood. As a surprise, it turns out her husband has, sometime when they weren't looking, purchased a speedboat. And one of the first things that he wants to do is go to the Santa Cruz pier. He thinks that the kids will have a great time there. The amusement park is there. And they also have another couple with kids already there who they can meet up with. At first, Adelaide is very reluctant to go. Her memories keep intruding during this trip and reminding her of the past. Her husband is more insistent, and she softens when he mentions that their son might have a good time there, who is clearly her favorite. On their way onto the pier, they pass by an ambulance. It looks like somebody's been injured. So they meet up with their other friends and their kids, talking and catching up while the kids play on the beach. So far, so good. Everything is fine. The kids are walking around and their son Jason goes missing for a few minutes, and Adelaide completely loses it. She's so worried about him, is screaming for him and is running around looking for him, and she finds him. He stepped away to use the bathroom but didn't tell anyone where he was going. That's when they decide to end their day trip. Adelaide explains to her son, why she was so worried about him and why she was so afraid for him. Everybody else gets ready for bed, and she goes to her husband and explains her reaction. He was not aware of her past and kind of waves away her worries about them continuing to stay there, because at this point she's convinced that something else is happening and she wants to leave. A few minutes later, their son comes in to tell them that there's a family standing in their front driveway. Their father goes to confront them. It doesn't work out. Adelaide calls the police. It'll be a minute before they get there. And in the meantime, the family breaks into their house to hold them hostage. And it turns out that the family standing in their front yard look identical to them. Her husband Gabe, Adelaide, their daughter Zora, and Jason standing in identical full-length red jumpsuits and holding pairs of gold-colored scissors. After a few minutes, the red version of Adelaide speaks. She explains she was a shadow of the Adelaide that lived in the sun, and that tonight was the beginning of those shadows, of those that were tethered to them, to come out into the light. So all three doppelgangers, Zora, Jason's, and Gabe's, each are separated from Adelaide and go through their own individual confrontations with them. Adelaide manages to escape on her own. So do her son and daughter, as well as Gabe. They all manage to escape into the speedboat and start heading across the lake to their friend's house. Unfortunately, before they can get there, their family is confronted by their shadows as well. When Adelaide arrives there, she's immediately dragged inside the house, and the shadow of her friend holds her hostage there. Meanwhile, the Shadow's husband gets into a confrontation with Gabe, and Zora and Jason are left on their own to confront the twins' shadows. Gabe manages to get away, Zora handles the twins, and Jason knocks Dahlia's shadow unconscious. So at this point, they're all exhausted. They're in the house, and to get a sense of what is going on, they turn on the news, and the news is not good. Apparently, this isn't just happening to their friends, family, and them. The local news actually depicts part of what is happening. The shadows are starting to form a line, holding hands. Adelaide decides that they're gonna drive out of town, that they're gonna get as far away from there as possible. And on their way out, they have to pass by the beach. And they find their passage blocked by a car that's on fire. Jason's shadow, Pluto, is standing in front of it. So Adelaide goes out to confront Pluto. And Jason thinks he's figured out a way to defeat Pluto because they mirror each other exactly. He decides that if he backs up, that Pluto will too, and Pluto ends up backing up into the fire. And at the same time that Adelaide is witnessing this, her shadow kidnaps Jason. So now Adelaide has to rescue Jason, and she knows exactly where her shadow took him. So Adelaide goes back to the Santa Cruz pier, down onto the beach where she can see that line forming for herself, going for what seemed like miles. Shadows hand in hand, just standing still as the line gets longer and longer. She goes straight into that amusement, continues to walk the path through the fake forest, past that same owl, down some stairs at the back of the amusement. Stairs that lead deeper and deeper and deeper underground until you're in a long tiled hallway with doors on either side and rabbits sitting or hopping, moving through the hallway. It's there that Adelaide's shadow reveals the catalyst for this plan, and that was the night of a major recital for Adelaide and her, both performing simultaneously to an audience, at the end of which she realizes that it was her destiny to begin this chain of events. Her shadow refuses to tell her where she hid her son, and there's another confrontation in which she kills her shadow, and she finds a key around her neck and realizes where she must have hidden her son Jason. She finds him there. He's terrified. She shows him her face and her hair so that he knows that it's her and not the shadow. They leave and head back up to the ambulance and start driving out of the city. As they drive away, Adelaide starts to remember more from that day, the day that she went missing. And in that memory, it is revealed that Adelaide is the shadow, that she attacked Adelaide, switched shirts with her, and left her there, and then went back up and found her parents and left with them. When Adelaide comes back to the present and looks over at her passenger, it's her son, and he's watching her very closely. She looks away and back towards the road and smiles to herself. As they continue driving, the camera pulls further and further away and starts to travel north over the mountains, following that red line. As the camera gets higher and higher, you can see how far that red line is stretching, along with smoke from multiple fires in the distance. And that's how the movie ends. This is one of my favorite thriller movies. To me, it's right on the edge of horror because it is horrifying, but I don't know. You guys let me know how you feel about it. To me, it's more in the thriller suspense category, even though there is a possibly supernatural element, possibly science fiction element. It just not quite to me. I love the whole concept. Like when the movie starts and you see that caption about how there are miles and miles of unused tunnels underneath the country, you know that in certain places that's true. We have cities that are built on top of other cities. You know, cities have been, or towns have been flooded in the past, you know, evacuated and then flooded for dams to be built, or broken down depending. It's not an idea that's totally out of the realm of possibility. These places existing. And then to have a kind of experiment running that was abandoned and never stopped. And the rabbits, it was just, there were so many interesting things that made you think. And that's really why I love the film so much, is it really makes you think past what you're seeing. And if that is not your thing and you're like, I just want to be involved in the story and then just end it there, you also have that as an option, because to me, this is one of those closed circle types of films. Even though it has all of these unanswered questions, you can still watch the film beginning to end, enjoy it as it is, and that be it. Because, you know, over here on this channel, we like to dig just a little bit. First off, I loved all the characters. I felt that we learned enough about each character and they were developed enough for us to have a very strong idea of who the characters are. And in a story like this, where you have doppelgangers, shadows of every person, we want to have that aspect of the story like tight. Because if I'm too busy thinking about something else about a character, then my attention is taken away from what's going on over here. And I think I've mentioned that in a couple of my other movie reviews, where something will be mentioned about a character and it implies other things. So then I'm thinking about those other things during the film, and I'm like, if this person has this part of their background, why don't they just do X, Y, and Z? So I appreciate that we have this like closed circle. We don't know what the husband does for a living. We don't know what Adelaide does for a living. We know that they're well off enough to take this vacation, that the entire family can take it. We know that Adelaide's family owns this house and has owned it for a very long time. That's okay. We don't need to know the specifics of that. We assume that everybody involved, like her husband and her and their friends, were all like born and raised in California. And this is like a vacation spot that they all like to visit. So all of that makes sense. It makes sense why they're there. It makes sense how they could get there. And their dynamic makes sense as well. Because it would not be surprising if the other family bought a house on the lake later on and somehow they met and became like vacation friends, and so every time they come down for vacation they just kind of hang out together. That would make sense to me. That's like one of those unspoken kind of details to me. I love the tempo of the film, because one of my gripes sometimes in films is that you have characters that have no other familial connections, like no mother, no father, no uncles, no aunts, no cousins, or anybody that they can reach out to for help. But because of the tempo of the film and because everything is happening so fast, even if they did have people that they could reach out to for help, it wouldn't matter in this scenario because everybody got problems right now. Like, for example, when they went to get the other family, I think that they were hoping at that point that it was just them, that it was only their family that had the shadows, and that if they got there in time, you know, join forces, resources and all that. But when they got there and they realized that they had shadows too, it is a natural assumption for you to think that, okay, so everybody must have one of these, and that it's not just a local issue that they're having. So I did like that. Also, the music was so creepy. In the trailer, I love the remix of that song, and I love how music is used in the film, because music has a prominent place in the movie, and that feels totally inappropriate for this kind of like thriller suspense film, but I like that. So I know the detail doesn't make any sense. I know it was not absolutely necessary, but it adds a little something extra, adds a little pop of something extra without taking away from the impact. Like when Dahlia is like crawling across the floor, she tells their like wireless personal assistant thing to call the police, and instead it plays that song. It makes sense. It fits in the scene. It's like, oh, dag. But also, police wouldn't have gotten there in time anyway. As you learn later on, stuff is happening. There are like these inappropriate events and these inappropriate details that are like, ugh. Especially in the context of this story where it's like a family is being terrorized by people that look exactly like them. I would give Us a 4 out of 5. And I think for me, what pushes it over is the twisty twist and the flashbacks to Adelaide's childhood. I think if we did not have more context for things, there wouldn't be enough character development, and we wouldn't be able to see how well and truly diabolical that twist was. Because a lot of the other shadows act more on impulse. I know you guys got lots of theories out there. This movie's been out for a couple of years. I can't wait to hear them. I love the cinematography, the shots, the use of symmetry. I loved how there were a lot of shots that were like through glass. So like windows, doors, looking at reflections of things off of other things. Like, for example, when Adelaide is in the basement where she used to practice ballet and she's looking at the bar, and she's remembering a younger version of herself who's also looking into the mirror at herself while she practices. So it's us looking at Adelaide, looking at Adelaide, looking at Adelaide. And I love that idea. If you've ever like had the two mirrors here and it just seems like an infinite version of yourself looking into the mirror, I love that whole concept realized in that scene. And as a side note, I really love that, number one, the shadows can't talk. Their communication is through hand signals and throat noises, and that Adelaide's form of communication after the traumatic event was dance. Because if you are making art, if you're like drawing or painting, that requires creativity, you know, inspiration, all of that. If she chose like singing, there is some creativity involved and you have to have an ear for that. But dance is, especially something like ballet, a certain amount of physical discipline is required and mimicking. So there are specific steps and routines that you do. You are given the choreography. And the fact that she was at one point a celebrated dancer is a very interesting detail to the story, because that creates such an interesting set of questions there. And all of that occurred to me when the movie was over. I did not have all of these questions while I was watching the movie. It wasn't until later, when I let the movie kind of marinate for a little bit, that I had these questions. But you all let me know what you think. Thank you all for spending your time here with me. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you all next time.